So next, I have to confess a personal connection to Cory Hunter, the editor of this wonderful book, who has been a colleague of mine and a friend. I just think she's a superstar. The author whose book we're talking about is Nanda Reddy, who Cory and Zibby found. Congratulations on the book. It's called A Girl Within a Girl Within a Girl, another incredibly intriguing title and something that is a novel that's so timely, has already received so many wonderful blurbs, is about, identity and, how sometimes you're faking it to make it and then it all comes back to haunt you and then to go back and explore it. So anyway, Nanda Reddy is a Guyanese American writer and former elementary school teacher who emigrated to the US with her family when she was 9 and grew up in Miami. She loves visiting off the grid places, which we love to hear about. She loves hiking, painting with watercolors, and resides in Reno with her husband and 2 sons. And this is your debut. So, congratulations. It's so exciting. Cory Hunter is senior editor at Zibby Publishing, a boutique publishing house in New York City. She has nearly 2 decades of experience in the New York trade publishing industry. At Doubleday, she acquired award-winning literary fiction and worked with many New York Times bestselling writers. And as an independent editor, she developed books published by many of the big 5. At Zibby Publishing, she edits a range of upmarket fiction and memoir and currently lives in Seattle. Cory, you guys, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Leigh. It's really, really nice to see you. And it is a real pleasure to be here talking about this remarkable debut. It's the kind of book that I love to edit because it combines such deeply felt storytelling with really engaging structural craft. Girl, as we call it around the office, opens as Maya, a suburban mom in Atlanta, is suddenly forced to reveal her hidden identity and her undocumented status to her unsuspecting husband. In doing so, she must relive her past, the past that she's tried so hard to bury. It's a beautiful and gripping portrait of a young immigrant's experience, coming of age tale, my favorite genre, a nuanced look at cultural identity, and I think just a wonderful testament to multiculturalism, love, and the power of found family. So there's obviously a lot to talk about in this book, but let's start at the beginning. Nanda, what inspired the writing of the story?
Well, before I get to that, I want to thank you, Cory, for that lovely introduction and thank Buzz Books for having me and thank everyone who's on watching. I really appreciate it. But inspiration, well, funny enough, this story came to me while I was on vacation years before I wrote a word of it. I was in Costa Rica with my family, and the tour guide made the honest assumption that I was from India. It happens a fair amount. And I didn't correct him because, it didn't bother me. There wasn't time to discuss the Indian diaspora. But the idea of an Indo-Caribbean woman who hides her true identity just popped in my head and got stuck there. I was just intrigued by the idea of someone who would allow other people's assumptions to shape what they know about her, someone who reinvents herself to erase her entire past. While I didn't know all of the details of the story at the time, I knew I would end up mining just, small truths from my life to write this book because I knew she would be an Indo-Caribbean Guyanese woman, which is a rare
Right.
fiction.
Yes. She's such a wonderful character. It's fascinating when you hear from an author that this small offhanded moment inspired the whole book. You think we all walk around having book ideas all the time, but it takes a writer. I know that your personal immigration story is incredibly different from your character studies experience on the page. But like you said, you mined small truths from your lived experience. What were those personal experiences that most influenced the emotional undercurrent of the story?
I mean, there were a few. Being an immigrant, it is a fish out of water experience for anyone who's experienced it. And for me, arriving at age 9, seminal formative time of life, I started public school speaking Guyanese, wearing my braided pigtails and homemade clothes. I arrived from this culture of obedience. to this American culture of self-determination, and so I floundered a bit. There was intense culture shock. I drew on a lot of those experiences, if not specifically, emotionally, when I was telling Sunny's story, particularly when she first arrives. In assimilating, there's a sloughing off or erasing of some of what you are to take on kind of new cultural skin. And in order to do that, I studied kids around me, how they dressed, how they spoke. Sunny does that too. But because of her circumstances and things that happened to her in this book, she takes it to a whole other level. She creates complete new identities, and she does it relatively fast. Her assimilation occurred way faster than mine did in real life. But I wanted to show how small factors like discovering the library and loving books and watching sitcoms and embracing pop music is an important part of assimilation. It was for me, and it is for Sunny.
Yeah, I love that. I love all of the references to books and TV and music throughout the book. It's just so relatable for all of us. But let's talk a little bit more about identity and code switching. The book is divided into parts that emphasize Sunny's evolutions of self. She becomes Nina, and then she becomes Cynthia, and eventually Maya. That brilliant structure was already there when we started working together. I was wondering whether you intentionally set out to create that heightened sense of metamorphosis, like code switching as a mode of survival from the get go, or if that happened more organically as you were writing during your process.
Actually, a lot of that structure was purposeful. Like I said, I was inspired to write this story about a woman who hides her identity. She's an immigrant, so I knew I'd be writing a story about code switching, and I knew the stakes would get higher and higher for her as the story progressed because there would have to be a reason for her to hide her identity. And so I knew bad things would happen. I also knew that code switching would be the key to her survival. With the code switching specifically, she learns to do it. There's a lot of trial and error in the beginning of the story as she learns to switch codes to adapt to different places. And she has to clean houses. And so she's in American homes. She goes to school. She works at this flower farm, and she has to apply all sorts of new codes to fit in there. She grapples with her language choices early on with how they make her, how she's perceived. Eventually, she becomes a pro, and she can wield language like a tool at the end. And she does that. She switches code entirely and morphs into someone new, effectively erasing who she was in the beginning. But identity, it's a really complicated thing. What she goes through is drastic, and it's probably relatable to a lot of immigrants. But I, from the very beginning, wanted to write an identity story that would strike a chord with all readers, immigrant or not, because I think identity is a theme we can all relate to. I think we all do this sort of code switching thing to some degree, hiding real parts of ourselves and curating public personas. I mean, we all kind of like throughout our life learn the nuanced power of language and perception, and so I think we all employ that to create our work selves, our online selves, our home selves. We're a little bit different with different groups of friends and family members. Humans are messy. Some of us learn to effectively hide our ugly parts. We believe those parts are erased. And this is what Maya, Sunny, as an adult, she believes. I don't think that's so rare.
You're probably right. At least that it's a sort of a fake it to make it. We don't always think about it as code switching, but we're just doing it all the time. And that's one of the great things about the story is it just, I think, is a window for all of us to kind of examine these different sides of ourselves, think about our behavior in a new way with more awareness. I think we have time for one more question. So I'm going to ask it. Beginning again is such a major theme in the book, a powerful one for me as a reader. I think it was for women in general too. The protagonist gets the words begin again tattooed on her ankle. And I wondered how those words apply to your own life.
Begin again. That would be a really cool tattoo, right? In Sunny's case, begin again is literal often. Of course, in the beginning, when she's sent to America, she begins again in that sink or swim fashion, like every immigrant does. But that eventually, begin again becomes a freeing mantra, something she chooses because it gives her power in this life where she has very little. And it allows her to reinvent herself, fail, because if she fails, she can always start over. We all begin again during seminal times in our lives, graduations, moving cities, getting jobs, and beginning and ending relationships. But I think begin again can be a simpler, everyday mantra. For me, it is. It allows me to be kind to myself and gives me freedom to fail. As a writer, it's actually kind of powerful. I'm working on a new novel, and sometimes I get worried about the direction I'm headed with a plot or a character. To get unstuck, I have to believe I'm allowed to scrap everything and begin again if it all goes wrong. I'll sketch out scenes like a choose your own adventure novel, and I'll spend a lot of time creating work that I know might potentially get scrapped. And that's a little scary, but in some ways, it's also really freeing. Um,
And that's a good note to end on. Yeah. Freeing, which is where Maya ends up at the end.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so many authors will admit to having scrapped many drafts, many manuscripts. So this is a difficult but not uncommon theme. Nanda, congratulations. It's so wonderful to have a debut writer who's so accomplished and an editor who's so devoted. Thank you guys so much. Have a good evening.
Thank you for
thank
having us. Great.
We're